My name is Keely Spring. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I am also licensed to provide telehealth in Colorado. In my practice, I work with both individuals and couples. Some of my niches are perfectionism, imposter syndrome, a lot of anxiety and depression that come along with those, communication issues. I do have a background in communication originally, so it's a little bit of a passion of mine. And this is our roundtable discussion today about boundaries. This is part of the roundtable series for my podcast, Therapeutically Aligned, where I interview clinicians normally about the work that they do on a one-on-one basis. Both of the panelists you will see here have been on the podcast. So I would encourage, if you see something you're interested in or hear something that you'd like to explore more with either one of the clinicians or myself, to reach out. I will put all of our information in the description so it's easy to access. To the end of introducing ourselves and introducing the panelists that I have here today, I believe we're going to start with Shereen. Shereen, would you mind introducing yourself to everybody out there and kind of what the broad strokes of your practice are and where you're located?
Absolutely. So I'm Shereen Mohsen. I am a licensed clinical psychologist in California, and I'm also licensed in DC as well. And so I have a group practice in San Jose called Relucent Psychology Group. Before that, I was working in an independent practice and then various other settings. At our practice, we specialize in seeing all ages, from ages 5 and up. We primarily focus on working with neurodivergence, trauma, providing EMDR, IFS, as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Me personally, my clinical interests include developmental trauma, relational trauma, as well as working with couples, specifically ethically non-monogamous couples. And then I also am providing the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, so I'm really into psychedelics and incorporating that into my work. And that's a little bit about me.
Love it. Thank you so much, Shereen, for being here. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Laurel, that actually ties in well to some of the work that you do as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Shireen, we haven't met before, but we should be friends.
Oh, I love that. Yes, please.
I am also a group practice owner, and I actually see hiring notices for your practice all the time, and you must be growing
Oh,
really fast, so you're doing something well.
thank you.
I have a little boutique group practice, and we are actually all virtual, which is a rare bird in our industry. We actually experimented with having an office, and it sat empty for 6 months, and we were like, well, I guess our clients just want to be virtual. We are EMDR specialists. All of our licensed therapists are EMDR certified, and pre-licensed folks will get certified when they get licensed. And we work with a lot of tech workers, lawyers, executives, people in the entertainment industry. And we've really been seeing a lot, kind of a concerning amount of burnout related medical leave clients coming through our door. And we have some partnerships with really fantastic psychiatrists and other supportive mental health providers that we work very closely with. So those are our niches, but also similarly, developmental trauma, attachment trauma, and that, dovetails into a high demand career where then you burn out. So lots of alignment between our practices, Shireen.
Well, it's great. Great to meet you.
Yeah, the struggle is definitely real. The
Hmm.
burnout
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
been coming up a lot. So today's topic is boundaries. Right before we started recording this, I was saying, I did not expect to talk about boundaries as much in my practice when I probably
Hmm.
first got started, but it is something that we clinicians talk about a lot. I think people think about it fairly narrowly, I would
Hmm.
argue, and it's a much more robust kind of issue. And so that's kind of what we're here to talk about and talk about kind of those nuances. So just to kind of get us started, I'm going to talk about just kind of list off a number of different types of boundaries there are before we kind of dive into how that kind of shows up in clinical practice. So we have physical boundaries, right? So your personal space, touch, things like that. Emotional boundaries, so respecting others, feelings, not kind of taking on their feelings, keeping your own feelings to without kind of projecting those on. Intellectual, so like right to change your mind. This is something I think our society has a hard time with,
Mm.
to change opinions, to have a difference of opinions. Time. So this is one of the ones I think people do think a lot about is kind of that time commitment and boundaries around time, how you're spending it. Sexual, which I would imagine Shireen comes up in your work with couples often, but probably with ours as well, Laurel. Material, so kind of shared spaces, different, ways in which we're sharing spaces with others, personal property. There's now digital boundaries,
Mhm.
online boundaries, what you're comfortable sharing
Critical.
or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Relationship boundaries, so like general, quality time, respect for the individual, kind of balancing all those different kind of components that come up. There's spiritual, so kind of respecting other people's spiritual boundaries and, how they feel about spiritual concerns or practices. Work boundaries. So this one is, to the point, Laurel, you were talking about burnout. This is one of the ones that come up. I also see high achieving people that are used to over functioning, I would say, and
Hmm.
boundaries around kind of work is something that, is problematic at times. Financial, so spending limits, independence, savings, those kinds of things.
I was waiting for that one because that's a big one.
It is, it is. And then there's social, so kind of energy to engage. Sometimes people are like, I just don't even want to do it, but I feel like I need to do it. Those kinds of social boundaries around our kind of time and energy and what we put into it. And then health and wellness is kind of the last one I wrote down. I'm sure there are more, but health and wellness is kind of be like, kind of how I prioritize diet and exercise and
Mhm.
mental health even.
Sleep.
Sleep. Yep. Yeah. And
Mhm.
I feel like, that one's a badge of honor, especially the high achieving folks that we probably see is like, oh, I only need 4 hours of sleep. And I'm, and it's like, do you? Do you really need this 4 hours? So my first kind of question to the both of you is uh what is your kind of definition of boundary? Like when somebody is asking you about boundaries in, your practice, what how do you kind of explain them to people? I mean, obviously I just listed off a whole bunch of
Mhm.
different ones, but we all kind of get a little spiel that we get together of how we
Yeah.
discuss boundaries. I'm curious, how do you discuss this with people you work with?
My favorite definition that I've heard is that boundaries are the distance from which you can take care of yourself and others at the same time.
Ooh, I like that.
And it encompasses all of the boundaries you just named very succinctly, that you're not prioritizing one over the other, that you recognize, like, I need to take care of myself so that I can care for others.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that one, Laurel, especially with parents, especially
Hmm.
with mothers. Kind of, I always talk about it around the like, put your oxygen mask on before
Hmm.
you, try to take care of everybody else's, that
Yeah.
concept. But yeah,
Yeah.
I like that interpretation.
Yeah, I like that definition a lot, Laurel. I also really appreciate just this really long list that you described of all the different boundaries. I mean, right before you said, when you said, I'm going to list all the boundaries, I'm like, okay, there can't be that many. But as you were listing them, I'm like, oh, yeah, there's that boundary. And then there's that one. And there's that one. Um, and as you were to describing them, I was actually thinking about even my own relationship with those different boundaries and how that actually impacts. We need to be really aware of what our relationship is with boundaries if we're going to be working with it, right? But the first thing that I thought of when you were talking about how do you define it or how you describe it is I kind of like the word that came to my mind, which is kind of surprising actually, is like guidelines. It's almost like, okay, what
Mm-hmm.
is like the line that I'm going to draw between, myself and others in the outside world so that I can keep myself safe, right? And going along with what Laurel was saying, and but also, in order for me to keep for me to, kind of be able to provide for others, I need to keep myself safe, right?
Hmm.
Because that's fundamentally what we're needing is safety.
Yeah.
And then of course other things like connection and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's very insular. It's a very personal thing, but it's just such a unique and complex topic because it does very much connect with the outside world as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I agree. I think, I think I see sometimes in social media or definitions that other people put out there around boundaries. So Shireen, you were talking about it being, your own personal guidelines, your own kind of line, that idea. And I've seen it talked about in some very kind of big very flashy. The one that's coming to mind is like Jonah Hill. I don't know if you remember this one. He had a girlfriend who was she was a surfer. And so she would take photos in her swimsuit
Yes.
and he said it was his boundary that she no longer take photos in her swimsuit. And I was like,
Nope.
that's not a boundary. That's
No.
that's
No,
That's a
that's a
preference.
that's an expectation or standard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Boundaries, and I also like that you use the word guideline, Shireen, because that implies that it's like, okay, this is generally going to be the deal, but like there can be situational exceptions, right? During COVID, like we kind of had to change our boundaries a little bit. Like some of our physical and health boundaries got a lot stronger, but some of our relational boundaries had to change, and some of our digital boundaries had to change. And that is the case. Like boundaries, they're strong, but they are not rigid, ideally, because there can always be an exception. I'm thinking about stuff like a kid's bedtime. A kid's bedtime is 8 p.m. On their birthday, New Year's Eve, they get to stay up, right? And that doesn't mean that the boundary goes away. It's like this is the standard unless there's been an extenuating circumstance or an intentional exception made.
yeah.
Yeah. I like your use of and bringing up the word rigid because then my mind goes to when we're too fluid with our boundaries or too rigid with our boundaries on either end of the extreme is where some problems can come up, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. To that point, I always I wonder how you both feel about this, but I will tell people it's easier to have a rigid boundary at first that you
Yeah.
then make a little bit more permeable than to go from having kind of no boundaries or very fluid boundaries to then trying to pull those in because of, interactions with others and
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my two favorite words clinically and just in life are structure and containment because like they're the foundation of everything, both in therapy and in the world. Like the structure and containment of therapy is we have an appointment, we start on time, we end on time, and like I don't talk about my stuff during the session. That's the deal. We have a literal contract around that. Okay, occasional self-disclosures, occasional things come up, but that structure and containment, like you said, Shireen, creates the safety. And then, of course, there are exceptions to that. Like there are times when you do go outside the container of therapy. I had a client that had a major medical procedure. I checked in with her in a way I would not have normally, and that's okay. It's not a violation. It's just a shift.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Laurel, what you're describing, sorry, Shereen, I just
No,
want
go
to
for it.
like to that point, that last little point. I think that's an important point. We do make exceptions to the rule, but we also too often get consultations around these kinds of
Hmm.
things, like when we are breaking those norms or those kind of boundaries that we've set in that container.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I should say without violating confidentiality. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I think what also is sticking out to me is the need for continuous reevaluation of your boundaries.
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
Just to continuously, and I do this a lot with my clients of just prompting them to check in. Okay, like you set this boundary, or you actually went a little bit astray, like a little out of what your typical boundary is. Check in with yourself and how does that feel? Did that
Hmm.
not feel good? And then maybe we need to talk about how you want to shift that moving forward, or and even with myself, I'm continuously checking in with like my work boundaries. I'm like, did that feel right? Last week felt really crazy. I think I actually need to hone in and like rein in my boundaries a little bit. And so I like also, and that's where the fluidity comes in, right?
Hmm.
And the importance of that self-awareness.
Mhm.
Totally.
Yeah,
Different seasons require different things.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's also why it's complex.
Yeah.
It's like very much in the gray. It's not black or white. And I think for many of us that can feel difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Um, so this might feel a little redundant in some ways, but I'm wondering how, I mean, I spoke a little bit to it earlier that I had no clue before I became a clinician how often boundaries would come up. And, you were mentioning, Shireen, like your personal boundaries. Those were some of the things that shifted for me. Before I was a th actual therapist, I was everybody's therapist around me.
With no boundaries.
Right? So then I
Yeah.
became a therapist and was like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. That's not good. So my idea of my own personal boundaries has really kind of evolved, and what I give myself permission to do, I think has been really helpful for me, in trying to kind of not be a people pleaser or not try to just help everybody in every way. And that's one of the ways it's kind of shown up for me. But I'm wondering for the two of you, has your definition of boundary kind of changed since you became a clinician to like before you were one?
Hmm.
I mean, I would say for sure. I
Mhm.
think gradually, I viewed myself before I was a clinician as a really extroverted person. And I think that once I became a clinician and was really, especially when I was seeing clients full time, I realized I actually really need more time alone than I
Mm.
ever did.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think the transition from not being a clinician to then being a clinician was big. Actually, I mean, I have young kids, so for me, what I've actually realized is the transition to being a mom has like for sure changed what my relationship is with boundaries. Absolutely, And so then being a clinician and a mom, oh, like I have to be especially tight with certain boundaries, just so that I don't lose my mind. And that's where it goes back to like taking care of myself. And just recognizing that my social battery, I think I can still be extroverted, but my social battery really does get drained from being a clinician, even though it's work. It's not something social and, outside of
Mhm.
the professional world. So that's something I wouldn't have expected to happen before becoming a clinician. So there's just a lot of learning, right? That happens in the different chapters of your life where you
Yeah.
realize, oh, I need to loosen up these boundaries a little bit, or I need to
Mhm.
rein them in.
Yeah. Yeah. Keely and I went to graduate school together
Oh,
and it
cool.
was it was quite a while ago. And, I was like early 20s in graduate school, right? And I think, as we're talking about boundaries, like I don't always know where the boundary between like therapist self and just me in the world is because my understanding of boundaries evolved as I was growing up and having adult experiences for the first time and having relationships end and having conflict and like figuring out what worked for me and didn't and developing a deeper understanding of myself and it's too hard to I can't parse out like was this my therapeutic training and experience or was this just living?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I think that is probably impossible to parse out.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Although I will say, like, I do have a boundary when, like, a neighbor is like, "Hey,
Mm.
Keely, feeling depressed today." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." But I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Who's supporting you with that?
Yeah,
Who's supporting
exactly.
you with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we maybe all of us has like that friend who, for
Mm.
whatever reason, they just don't go to see a therapist, but they keep bringing up things and kind of pulling that on you. And
Mm.
yeah, my redirect is like, man, it would be really great if you talked to a therapist about
Hmm.
that. And I've even had a friend say, but yeah, but you're my therapist. I'm like, absolutely not. I am
Nope.
not.
Not your therapist.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I had somebody say that in my life years ago because I had given them advice. I was like, well, I wouldn't do that. And she's like, well, I don't want therapist Keely. I want like, this version of Keely. And I was like, no, 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 this is that version. Like therapist Keely wouldn't give you that advice. Like
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Hmm.
I'm showing up as your friend in this situation, not as
Yeah.
a therapist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, so let's kind of pivot a little bit to how is it clinically when we enact boundaries? So, we all have consent forms and things, kind of the container that we set up front with people. And, sometimes people, at least in my practice, they'll be like, oh, yeah, 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 no big deal. And I'm like, no, 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 we need to make sure we go over this. And there's things that I present that I'm like, this may seem weird to tell you, but if I see you on the street, I'm not going
Hmm.
to acknowledge you. I'm happy to acknowledge you. I'm happy to have a conversation, but I will not break the
Yeah.
confidence and confidentiality in which we have. You know, so there's a lot of things, the ways that we set up that container. And I'm just wondering, like with clients, do you find that there's certain ones that are kind of harder to,
Mm.
enforce or, kind of come up more often or more frequently for you?
Yes, but my response to them is never a direct conversation about boundaries. It's more of what is said or not said in response. So, it might be like, well, we do need to end on time, but I'm hearing that we should start with this next week. Or, I've definitely had people like send me like a link to a video or a social post, and I'll just be like, let's talk about this. And like, and they eventually get it. Like if you redirect often enough, they're like, oh, right, okay, this is what we do. It exists in this container, and I can't be like emailing journal entries or like it exists in this particular way. And if you're just consistent with that, starting and ending on time, not communicating too much outside of session other than maybe some logistical like rescheduling things, or if they do reach out, being like, are you feeling safe? Do we need to meet sooner? And they understand pretty quickly what the deal is. You don't have to explicitly say what the boundary is. They get it.
I think that's great that you don't have to explicitly say it. There are times where I have clients where I have
Okay.
to where I have to explicitly say it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah. I mean, there are certainly clients who will get it, and you don't have to say
Mm-hmm.
anything. I think specifically for clients who are struggling with setting their own boundaries,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can be really helpful to just explicitly say it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've found that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, I mean, I also like to explore it with them. Like, I noticed that, say, for example, like you're sending a lot of social media clips
Mm-hmm.
that you want me to take a look at. That seems really important to you. What is it
Mm-hmm.
actually like for you, the fact that I'm not looking at them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And explore what their feelings are around the boundary,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I really like that. But then also when there is a client who, say, isn't getting it, and they keep pushing, I think that I have found then it can be really helpful to directly speak to it and say, what is it like for you that I am setting this boundary?
Mhm.
How's that feeling for you? Right. And I notice, and oftentimes I just kind of put it on them. Like I'm just noticing that
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm consistently setting this boundary, you're still doing X.
Mhm.
What do you
Mm.
make of that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's just this opening for so much exploration around
Yeah.
that for them. And then in addition, how I really like to work too, relationally specifically, is so what is that like for you?
Mm-hmm.
For me to not be,
Available
flexible.
on nights
Yes,
and weekends or whatever.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because
Mm-hmm.
my philosophy is, it almost always traces back to family of origin stuff,
Yeah.
you know? So it's like, so your mom, never really respect,
Mm.
that kind of thing. And their reactions and feelings around us setting boundaries
Yeah.
is usually related to something along those lines. And so we are definitely modeling a certain structure,
Yes.
right?
It's sometimes the most important thing we do is hold the frame.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 This is bringing up for me. I'm wondering about like generational differences
Mm.
because I had a younger client, around, early 20s, who repeatedly he would text me because I have a boundary of like, do not text me unless it's logistical, like I'm running late,
Yeah, yeah.
need to reschedule or something like that. And he would repeatedly, message me right before the appointment and say, hey, Keely, can we just start 15 minutes late and then just go over our time? And I'd be like, no,
Mm-mm.
we cannot, and he would get a little upset about it and get really frustrated with me that I wasn't being flexible. And I had to be very explicit with him about the boundary of like, this is your time. There is somebody
Mm-hmm.
else that's right after you that has their time. I'm not willing to take their time from your time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there was part of me that was like, I see this a little bit more with younger generation
Mm.
being a little bit more kind of, especially around the time boundary.
Yeah.
Wondering if you guys are seeing that as well
Hmm.
or noticing differences.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. What I was actually thinking where you were going to go with that was there with the younger generation feeling like them continuously texting around like personal things,
Oh,
like
uh-huh.
sharing personal things on there
Mm.
because there's just so much comfort around having full-on conversations over text with their friends and whatnot. And so they think they can do that with their therapist. And I see this a lot in my practice where I'm like
Mm.
really having to continuously work with my staff on setting the boundary of like,
Yeah.
we're not doing therapy over text.
Mhm.
I think
You know,
BetterHelp might be partly to blame
but
for that.
yeah, yes, yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's partly it. There are these other platforms that encourage
Hmm.
that and support that. So I've been seeing that a lot, probably more so more than the wanting more time flexibility.
Mm.
And I think even with AI, and people being very opening up their
Hmm.
ChatGPT app and just talking about X, Y, and Z, and then they'll maybe just copy and paste it to their therapist and say, "This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm feeling," you know. And
And
yeah,
ChatGPT has no boundaries.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
It's
exactly.
always available and it's always going to
Yeah.
tell you you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. So I think it can get really tiring for therapists, especially newer therapists in the field,
Mhm.
where they're just having to continuously put up this boundary around social media, this boundary around texting, this boundary around AI use, this, right? And it can just, yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually part of my consent that I will not friend you on social media. I do not
Oh,
follow
yeah.
you. I do not engage with you. And so I usually, if somebody does start doing this pattern, I like what Laurel was saying earlier, and I also will come back to like, remember when we first talked about
Hmm.
things like this is one of those things. And,
Yeah.
you know, the other piece about this in particular, the social media shares or like the extra shares, because I've had people too send me like, here's my 30-minute talk I did. Can you review it and let me? And I'm like, no, I don't have,
Mm.
no. Let's talk about why you want that. But I do think that there is this uh expectation that we all are going to be more engaged in these ways. And I feel like
Mm.
there is this pressure sometimes to, hold that. And I don't think clients always get why we're
Mm.
not engaging in that. But I always say too, for me, it's like, I don't really want to, I want to have the relationship that we have in the room be kind
Yeah.
of this like sacred place. And if you're
Yeah.
sharing with me and then I'm seeing, so and so that you've been complaining about likes this and commented, and it just adds a whole different layer of things that were not part of the work that we're doing that are now in the room with us. And so sometimes I will explain it that way, that it's a much bigger thing than me just seeing whatever
Yeah.
you're putting out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it compromises the container, I bet,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. To what Laurel was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there other boundaries that you see in your, I mean, we were talking a little bit about time and kind of shares and those kinds of things, but with some of the other things like Shireen, I would imagine for you, there's because of the non-monogamous
Mm.
partnerships that you kind of work with, that there might be
Mhm.
more discussion around sexual boundaries and kind of keeping that at the
And
forefront.
time boundaries,
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
boundaries. Yeah.
So is your question specific to my work with the client or just topics that come up, clinical topics that come up in the content of our sessions?
I don't know that I really thought that through.
Yeah, a
So
little bit of
you're
both,
right.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, specifically with open relationships, boundaries comes up all the time,
Yeah.
right? All the time. And sometimes, a lot of the work that we're spending time on is working on, if I'm working with somebody individually or as a couple, just working on their relationship with the idea of boundaries,
Yeah.
right? And just getting comfortable with the idea of it because boundaries is so necessary. Guidelines are so necessary if a non-monogamous relationship is going to work. And so, but sometimes we have to start at square one and just be like, so how do you feel about boundaries in general, right? And then, I mean, some really deep conversations can come out of that because if there's some questions or, feelings of low self-worth, a person may not feel like they deserve boundaries,
Yeah.
right? If they grew up in a family system where their boundaries were constantly ignored,
Hmm.
then the idea of setting a boundary in a relationship may be like, but why would I do that? It's okay for them to do whatever they want, right? So,
Right.
so then that's a lot of where the work starts, which
Hmm.
can take a long time, right? Just
Yes.
depending on the severity of it. And so, um, I think, yeah, we can talk about boundaries more from like behaviorally, like, okay, what do you need to do? But I think
Mm.
the stuff that I get really passionate about is just beneath those layers of like,
Yeah.
well, where's the struggle really coming from and what does this mean to you and how is this playing out?
Yeah. And
Right?
it often goes back to core beliefs. My
Yeah.
feelings don't matter. I'm
Yeah.
not considered. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. people around me don't care, they
Yeah.
don't care, right? That
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laurel, and the work that you do, I know it's similar in the complex trauma that Shereen
Yeah.
also works with. Do you see certain types of boundaries coming up more often?
Boundaries with work, man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, People lending their nervous system to an employer 24/7. That's not normal.
Mm-mm.
I don't lend I'm a small business owner. I love my work. I love my clients. I love my employees. My nervous system is not available to the work 24/7.
Yeah.
And I'm in a minority percentage of people who feel aligned with their values, their skills, what they do for a living, and what it pays them. Like I am exceptionally privileged in that. And also, I get to have a regulated nervous system that is my own part of the time.
Mhm.
So, boundaries with work, that's really the primary thing that I see in my clients, that they're emotionally, mentally, energetically available to an employer all the time. It compromises their sleep, it compromises their relationships, it compromises their health. And they they can kind of objectively see that it's not okay, but they're extremely fearful of doing anything to change it.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think what's really hard about that too, because we see a lot of tech workers as well being in
Mm-hmm.
Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
The company culture,
Yes.
it is so influential and how the person creates
Yes.
a relationship with their work, right? So when they're looking, when a person is looking to get a promotion because they need the financial bump and they see everybody around them working constantly, meetings just constantly getting thrown in on their schedule where they don't even get a lunch break or a 10-minute break or something. That's just the culture of the job. So many companies are like this. It's really sad. Then they see everybody around them doing the same thing. They think, okay, I guess this is just what it's like,
Yeah.
and so then it ends up becoming them fight. It isn't just that they're struggling with their own
No,
setting their
it's
own boundary.
systemic.
It's a
It's a
systemic
systemic
boundary.
problem,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But the fear around making a change, they'll lose their edge. They won't be as good a leader. They won't be as good a worker. They'll get fired. They'll get passed over for a promotion. And I have to do a lot of challenging of that. And it's not that it's not possible that that would be true.
Yeah.
But I like to do this mental exercise with people, especially lawyers that I work with. That this is especially true if you're in big law. And they're like, Laurel, I don't even know if I can meet for the whole session today. I have so much work to do. And I say, okay, great. What do you have on the rest of the day? And they'll tell me a few things. And I'll be like, okay, so we're going to do a full session. And then after the session, you're actually going to go to the gym. And they're like, Laurel, you're crazy. Like, no. But they do it, and lo and behold, they now have more mental bandwidth to do higher quality, more focused work, be more productive, and actually go to bed maybe an hour earlier, even though they took a full hour for therapy and a full hour for the gym. Time is a flexible construct, but people tend to think of it as very fixed.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I see that a lot. I work with
Yes.
lawyers too. There's like this pressure to, hit your numbers. Very
Yeah.
similar kind of the tech thing, right? You've got a 2 week run or whatever that you're trying to get this out and it's
Mm-hmm.
all hours. I also think, I mentioned this earlier, but there's this like badge of honor that people start to wear of like who can
Mm-hmm.
like out perform others by not taking care of themselves. Like it's like this weird kind of
Yeah, no one wins that game.
no one.
Mhm.
No, you know who wins, the owner of the company wins.
Yeah, exactly.
The stock
Yeah,
people, the stock holders. Yeah.
funders say
Well,
that.
and I think what's tricky too is I think people maybe in their 20s can pull off something like that where they're
Yeah.
sleeping for 4 hours a night and they're working. But then as they get older, they realize, oh no, like my relationships are
Mm,
suffering, my health is suffering,
yeah.
and they realize that's just not the way to go.
Mhm.
And there isn't a lot of meaning in the life that they're building.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I often see just a bind that either
Hmm.
lawyers or tech workers them then find themselves in where they finally feel empowered to set that boundary, but then they start to see the system. of their employer
Mhm.
pushing back. And then it ends up bringing up the question of, well, then do I still want to do this?
Mm,
Do I still want to work in this place? Do I still want to be in this industry if this is what's expected of me? And that can be a tough question
Yeah.
to sit with.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Those golden handcuffs, man.
I know. They're
For
real.
real.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing that comes up around this is I always think of this as like death by a thousand paper cuts because it's
Yeah.
constant, like
Yeah.
Slack ping, the messages, they're just constantly. And so one of my things that I'm always working with people is like you don't have to switch it off and on, but you do have to work the edges so that
Yeah.
you start pulling back on, saving an hour of time, like turning those notifications off, putting it in a place that's harder to get to on your phone so that you
Mm,
find yourself that the intention is not
mm-hmm.
to keep, checking it so that, and I will admit that, years ago and stuff, I was less good about, I've got a work phone and a personal phone. So my work phone, especially during the pandemic and stuff, I just felt like I was always on. Now it's like I leave my work phone. I don't, and even if I see something has popped up or, I will not check it past a certain point at time because I don't want the onus of having to try to think through that, whatever I need
Mm-hmm.
to like navigate. And I'm constantly talking to people about this kind of boundary around like these things are just slowly sapping your time. They're just,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
eating into it.
I have two thoughts on that. Fantastic book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, right here,
Mhm.
that I love. Catherine Price, Catherine with a C. Um, but also, I want to share a boundary I set recently that I was pretty proud of. So I'm on a bunch of therapist listservs, various professional organizations, and it's valuable to be on those listservs. But there's also like hundreds of emails a day, and probably 299 of those emails are not relevant to me.
Mhm.
And so I built a tool on AI that AI does not have access to my email because that's a HIPAA violation, but it built a tool that lives within Gmail and it knows what I would want to read and what I don't. So certain topics or requests for specific referrals or interesting professional development opportunities. I trained it on what I am interested in for a while and I installed it. And now all those listserv emails, they go to a separate folder and it only triages the ones that would actually be relevant and interesting to me into my inbox. And I am now spending half the amount of time on email that I used to.
That's awesome.
Laurel, that sounds amazing. I need to figure out how to do that. So I might
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
you.
Uh-huh.
The amount
Uh-huh.
of spam and just like,
Yes.
people putting you on, all these, subscribed things that you're like, what is this now?
Yeah.
And it's hundreds of emails a day that I'm getting.
People hitting reply all when they don't need to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so another kind of thing that kind of comes up for me or that I've been thinking about around boundaries is how as clinicians vary. We're human, we have different ideas of boundaries. Some
Mm-hmm.
people have very kind of flexible boundaries and some people
Mm-hmm.
have less so. Example actually from grad school that this was so one of we had like a class where we would talk about cases or whatever, and one of my clients was somebody who also worked at the school and was auditing a CBT class that I was in. And I had gone to my supervisor and I'd said, "Oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
like," and it was Chuck. He was like, no,
Yeah.
Keely, like this is a learning experience around boundaries
Yeah.
and like appropriateness and this, and you can handle this. It'll be fine. Well, that same person, because she was staff and always kind of around, she had made cookies for her colleagues and she brought a cookie for me and was like, here's a cookie. And I was like, oh, okay. And I knew, and I was like, I've never been given a cookie before. I don't know. Um, and so I brought it to the class about clinical work, and it was this other clinician, Robin, who has much more rigid boundaries, and she was like, "Oh, you got to talk about the cookie, Keely. This is really bad. I can't believe you accepted the cookie. Why would you do
Oh.
that?" Yes, and then I went to Chuck, my actual supervisor, and I said, Robin says I got to talk about the cookie. Like I'm overwhelmed with like, what do I do?
Sometimes a cookie is just a cookie, Keely.
Exactly
I
what he
gotta
said
talk
to
about
me.
the cookie.
That is exactly what he said, Laurel. He was like, sometimes Keely, a cookie is just a cookie. You don't have to
Yeah.
talk about it.
And she
But
was giving it to everyone.
she was giving it to everyone. But one clinician's view was like this means
Yeah.
something deeply about the relationship and the boundaries you have. And I was
Mm,
flooded. But I think those in more nuanced ways come up, where maybe we're consulting with other client or other clinicians and something that we think is fine, they're like, oh, I would never do that, or something they would do that you would never do, or
hmm
these kind of so question to the both of you is have you had those moments and like,
mm.
are there certain things that you find come up more with clinicians, like certain types of boundaries that people tend to be different on a little bit more often?
I'm
Well,
trying to think of a yeah,
yeah.
I'm trying to think of something that happened where a clinician said, "Oh my gosh, I would never do that."
Mm.
Yet it was something that I don't know. Laurel, do you have an example?
Well, I was just laughing because I had a bunch of leftover cookies from a party I had thrown, and I had them like in a little container, and I went to therapy, my own therapist, and I was just like, so I have these leftover cookies. I threw a party, but I don't want to do the whole thing where we talk about what the cookies mean. And she was like, Laurel, I love cookies. Just give me the cookies. And I
Yeah.
was like, great. Thank you for not making me do
Yeah.
that ridiculous exercise.
I mean, I have a hard time with rigidity around this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I do.
hmm
I really do. I don't agree with this person, Robin, where it's like, oh my gosh, it's
hmm
such a it's, and also what I don't appreciate is how she really vilified it. It was like, oh my gosh, this
Mm,
is bad. This means something deeper. Like that, it's so bad that you and then she was judging you and your decision. I don't love that.
mm,
I don't.
Um, yeah, I mean, we've had clients at my practice where, they'll bring in things for my employees, and we always just we don't necessarily just take it with it just at face value, but like
hmm
we evaluate, like,
hmm
oh, okay, like a
Yeah.
one-off situation may mean nothing or it may mean a lot. It just depends on the client, right? And
Yeah.
it depends on the relationship. And so I don't like these blanket statements.
Yeah.
Right. And I think similarly around self-disclosure, right? I mean, of course, there's certain things that are just not okay with sharing with clients, but there's also, I think, some fluidity around that. There's a spectrum, right?
hmm
There's something that maybe you'd share with one client that you would never think to share with another client,
Yes.
right? And
Correct.
right. And you may accept some kind of food item or whatever from one client, but maybe it means something different from another client, right? So I think that like if you throw out these really blanket statements around it, you're missing the nuances
Yeah.
of what it can mean depending on the case, right?
And honestly, I would say 95% of the time when a client gives a gift, it's because they care about you as a human being and they want to express that in a culturally sanctioned way,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? And now sometimes the gift isn't appropriate. It's, too high monetary value or to like reckon like sure, but like, like I've had kids like bring me a little like craft they made or like I just try and take it as like yes, this is a contracted relationship and like it's boundaried and very specific and honestly like kind of weird in the
Mhm.
like spectrum of human relationships, but it is a human relationship and we don't have to like litigate every gesture.
Yeah.
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 100% agree with that sentiment. And I think, to your point, Shereen, I think people do get really rigid around boundaries. And I
hmm
think sometimes, for me at least, when I hear another clinician being really rigid, um, there's something that comes up for me around, well, why is the rigidity there for you? Because it is so case specific and it is, and in
mm
those moments, if I'm being honest, there's been times I felt judged by other clinicians because they were like, why would you do that? Or why would you say, and I was like, well, because to me, with that person that I've been seeing for 6 years, there was a different type of dynamic than there is with somebody I've been seeing
Yeah.
for 2 months that,
Yeah.
that would be inappropriate with. But this person
Yeah.
and I have a different dynamic just because they've,
hmm
been around for a long time.
Can we talk about financial boundaries in therapy,
Please, yeah.
aka like the cancellation policy or like sliding scale stuff? Because this will get people like I make a point to not spend much time in therapist Facebook groups, but like these two topics will light up the chat.
Yes. Well, and I think for like a context setter, there is a lot of pushback in the larger population that our fees are too high and why are we
Mm,
charging this much? And, why don't we just accept insurance? And the reality
mm,
is it's so much more complicated than that. And then
yes.
add in this layer with clients who don't really understand it. So
Yeah.
please, Laurel, can you give some more context of how you're thinking about this?
Yeah. Well, and I think all three of us are private pay, like that we don't take insurance. Yeah. Which for me is a not just a financial boundary. It's actually a time boundary and a relationship boundary because um last year I did a single case agreement for a long time client. And that single case agreement, actually pretty high reimbursement rate, but the amount of work I had to put into getting paid was so much more time than I spent with the client,
Hmm.
Yeah.
right? So if you think about you're doubling the amount of time that you're spending, it's also just a really bureaucratic, frustrating process. So that A is a time boundary. And also just in California, the reimbursement rates are not really a living wage for therapists. So I think we all understand that here. There also are therapists that take insurance and make it work and they feel really like that's really aligned for them. And I have tremendous respect. Like their boundaries are not my boundaries are not their boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
time and financial as well as relational, I said, because um, when someone other than the client is paying for therapy, it changes the therapy. And that is true whether it's an insurance company or like a victims of crime fund or an EAP or a grandparent or a partner
Mhm.
or a kid is paying for an older adult's therapy. Like it changes the relationship because that person can say like, oh, I don't want to pay for this anymore, and then the relationship has to end, or they have to talk about sliding scale, and that impact on the therapeutic work, you can't overstate how much that could really mess up the work. Insurance deciding, nope, you've had enough sessions. And you're like, no, we're just getting somewhere. We're just starting to get into it. So it is not just about like, we want to make more money. Like, we want to make a living wage. We want to not be spending all our time fighting with insurance companies. And we don't want someone else to be able to dictate when treatment starts and stops.
Yeah. Well
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. I mean, it also sounded like, Laurel, you were alluding to like judgment that can happen among clinicians around
Oh,
that.
yeah. A lot of like morality slinging.
Yes, we're supposed to
Yeah.
be helpers.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
supposed to be business people.
Yeah.
I think that's actually one of the reasons why I don't really get into the Facebook
Yeah.
conversations because I've just like years ago I dabbled a bit and when I saw just the how harsh people were and how judgmental people were, I'm like, this doesn't feel great. Like
Mm-mm.
it just feels like, are we therapists here? Are we healers who are like in a respectful place where we're going to be respectful to one another or not? And I think in
Yeah.
some of those Facebook chats they are not.
Right.
Um, and I think, that's actually it comes back down to a boundary, right? Like one of my
Mm-hmm.
boundaries is not going into those Facebook
Yep.
chats because I don't want to be around people who are really judgmental and
Mm-hmm.
are condescending about some of the choices that and boundaries that we have set for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so
It's
yeah.
also never ever appropriate to consult on clients in those
No,
groups and the amount
no.
of times that it happens, or even someone asking for a referral in those groups. And I'm just like, nah, you gave away so much information
So
about the
much
client.
information. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. One of my boundaries is I only use those groups for like, hey, does anyone have a referral for this specific thing without any client info, or like a friend is subletting an office and I offered a post in the group.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, very specific things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm actually
And then
not
I get out.
Get out. Yeah. What did you say, Keely?
I'm actually not on Facebook, so I don't
Oh,
Good for
yeah.
you. Good
Good for you.
boundaries.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's definitely a boundary I got off some of those social media. I will say that I'm seeing a lot of this come up though on LinkedIn. There is
Mm,
like a battle raging on LinkedIn posts about
Mhm.
therapist pay, and then there's
mm,
a lot of people chiming in. I will say that there is like a gendered space about this
mm,
a little bit. I find that men who post are a little bit more like, what's the problem? I have a full practice and nothing's, this is not a problem. And then kind of shaming women that are saying like, I'm having a hard time filling my practice,
Mm,
or, and they're like, well, your rate's too high. And it's like, well, this is what I need to pay in this area
hmm
to survive with
Mhm.
this, because Laurel, you were talking earlier, we only have so much like boundary, a time of energy that our nervous
Yeah.
system can do this work. Like there's
Yeah.
only so much time. And another thing that you're pointing out is there's a lot of stuff that happens on the back end that people don't see, a lot of
Yeah.
consultations, kind of planning, thinking about things,
Yes.
learning new
Advocating.
Yep.
Yeah.
making CEUs, all these kinds of
Yes.
things that are part of our practice that that session fee goes into
Yeah.
supporting us doing that. And I think there's this really misunderstood piece that seems to happen. And there's these very like, to me, there's like a little bit of overgeneralization. I was just looking at it earlier
hmm
this morning and I was like, oh, and I so wanted to be like, this is such overgeneralization and black and white thinking. And like, because all these people were like just kind of
hmm
attacking other people about therapists just need to take insurance and be happy that they, and this is ridiculous. And then there were people that were like, trying to be a little bit more nuanced. But I just thought, like, this is so icky that everybody just seems to have an
Yeah.
opinion. And a lot of people were basing it on, I had a bad experience with one therapist.
Mm,
And so
Mm.
therefore, all therapists are horrible, or
yeah.
when they don't deserve this pay, they need to, and it's like, oh goodness, there's so many issues
Mm,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I think when I see people saying things like that, like, oh, every therapist should just take insurance, I don't really give it much time or
Yeah.
energy, honestly, because
Mm-mm.
they don't walk in my shoes. You
hmm
know, like if I could take insurance and make that work in my life financially
Yeah.
and personally and time-wise, I would love to. Of course, I
Yeah.
love the idea of making my services more available to people, but
Yes.
that just doesn't work. It doesn't work. I can't
And
live
yeah.
in, yeah.
There's some states where it's totally viable to do that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Like I was talking to a friend of mine. She runs a practice in West Virginia and she's 100% insurance based. And she's like, she's making a good living
Yep.
in West Virginia,
Yeah.
know?
Similarly,
And like,
I have,
I'm
yeah,
so happy that that
yeah.
is the case.
I
And
think in
it's,
California, it's just a different story, right?
yeah,
Similarly, I have a friend of mine who's also a group practice owner in Nebraska, and their reimbursement rates are phenomenal.
yes.
Phenomenal. Okay. You can
Mm-hmm.
live very well taking insurance. But
Mm-hmm.
here in California, it's just not possible, specifically when you're living in some of these really expensive
Yeah.
areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, with those chats, I don't even bother.
Mm-mm.
And,
it's one of those things when they pop up, it like hits me. It's like almost like and I'm like, oh, and then, I honestly
mm,
am not engaged in any way because what's the point? There's no,
what's the
It's
point?
but
so
it's
unproductive.
unproductive
Absolutely.
on so many levels.
Absolutely.
And, I think Laurel was you that said earlier, but there's a systematic problem with a lot of this
Yes.
stuff, and a lot of it gets put at the hands of therapists to fix
Totally.
when, whether it's around financial stuff or other kind of boundaries, that's like the clinician is the problem when it's like, well, there's this whole system around us that we are
Mm,
kind of trying to navigate within.
yeah.
And that doesn't always, even with the insurance question, yeah, there's some people I know take it in different states. It's wonderful for them. Great.
hmm
But you're also opening up, you had said this earlier, I think, Laurel, but the piece about like insurance companies then get all this information, they get all the
Yes.
nuances. It's a different dynamic they can deny coverage, they can
Yeah.
claw back the sessions that you've already done, money for the sessions you've already done. They can cut off services. There's a lot
It
of
feels like having a third person in the room. And
Yeah, there basically is.
I'm
Yeah.
not interested in doing
Yeah.
therapy with some dude from Cigna sitting on the couch next to my client, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
I'm too protective of my clients to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it gets tricky for clinicians when they don't want to take insurance, but they also are struggling getting private pay clients.
Yeah.
And so I think in some ways, yeah, and you said it yourself too, Laura, like those of us who can have private practice or private pay practices, I mean, I work very hard for my private pay clients in my practice.
hmm
There's no question about it. And I spend a lot of money on advertising. So I'm working
hmm
for it, but also it's a privilege, right? To not
Yeah.
have that third person in the room.
Yep. And
And
everyone deserves that, by the way.
absolutely. Yeah.
And in a perfect world, people who are using insurance would also have that level of privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, okay, so kind of we're kind of coming up on an hour here, so I just kind of want to have some final thoughts. Are there things that we haven't discussed about boundaries that you think, kind of come up often that we, should at least put a little pin in or a little bit of information for people?
Yeah, I just like to differentiate between a boundary crossing and a boundary violation.
Oh, great.
Because a boundary crossing can be completely appropriate. Like I said, I had a client who had a major medical procedure that is going to require months of rehabilitation. Yeah, I had some boundary crossings in that context, but none of them were boundary violations. I wasn't showing up at this client's house with a casserole. That would be a boundary violation. But there are some contexts in which a therapist maybe going to visit them in the hospital would not be a violation if it was discussed ahead of time and was wanted and welcome in the course of a long-term therapeutic relationship. That's a crossing, not a violation. And then there are sometimes therapist you hear about therapists doing things that you're like, there's no context in which that would be okay.
Mhm.
And that would be a violation.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at what is the number one way that people are losing their license,
Yeah.
Mm, hmm.
right? And I believe it is having a romantic relationship with your
Yep.
client,
Hmm.
It's
which is
just
bonkers.
always blows my mind. I
Yeah,
just,
Yeah.
I've never had an inclination. I've never like it just does my I just don't my mind doesn't go there. Anyway, yeah, it's bonkers. That and
Yeah.
the number one way, the number one complaint lodged against therapists during 2020, 2021 to our licensing board was showing up to telehealth sessions under the influence.
Oh
not into
no.
that.
Yeah, therapists showing up drunk or
Wow.
high. Yeah.
It's interesting that we've been talking about boundaries in therapy, and
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember that show on Apple TV, Shrinking, I think is the name of it.
Yeah.
Talk about
Oh,
boundary violations and
Oh,
boundary
yeah.
crossing.
Everything he does is a boundary
I mean,
violation.
I used to teach at a
Uh-huh.
grad program, and if I was teaching anything about boundaries, I'd be like, watch the show,
And do
take
the
a look,
opposite.
take a look at what you should not be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's really I enjoy watching the show, but I think what's really tricky about that show is it showcases a lot of boundary violations that
Yeah.
could be incredibly harmful, but
Yeah.
in this funny, cute, endearing way, right?
Yeah.
And so for
Hmm.
people who aren't as familiar with therapy, they're looking at this and
Yeah.
thinking this is normal. And so that's where I start to have a really big problem with it.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
personally, I could be on my couch on a Friday night and enjoy it, but then like professionally, I'm like, this is so bad,
Yeah. I'm horrified.
horrified by this. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll see you're shrinking and I'll raise you. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend had
Oh, I haven't seen that.
there's a therapist on that show, and the main character in the final season is diagnosed with BPD.
Okay.
And but it's a musical comedy, so take this for what it is. But the therapist has very good boundaries, and the client will do all kinds of boundary violations, like showing up at the therapist's house, crawling through the doggy door, and the therapist is like, "This is not appropriate. I will see you at the office at your scheduled time. I cannot see you outside of the scheduled time. You may not show up at my house." So, like, even though it's in the context of a musical comedy, like
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? This therapist isn't the worst.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I will say in the
Yeah.
interviews I've done with everybody, the number one thing that comes up when I ask
Mm,
people what they think movies get wrong is
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm.
always the therapist's like presentation. And I do think, to
Mm,
your point, Shireen, like there is this idea that we like boundaries are just no big deal. Like there's so much that's put out there that it's like we're supposed to be your best friend. We're gonna meet you at the bar. We're gonna, it's like
Mm-hmm.
absolutely not. Like you
mm-hmm.
literally lose your license if you did any of those things.
Yeah.
And to your point, Laura, like I think most of us don't have that inclination to
No.
cross those. Of course, there are times where some of the boundaries are a little nuanced or, where you seek consultation about them. But for those bigger ones, it's like, yeah, there's
Yeah.
so many representations of just, and I almost think it's like wishful thinking or something that people are like,
Mm,
like we have this intimate relationship
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's going to become something else. And it's the reason that we keep the boundaries the way that we do is because it is important for that person's healing that
Nice.
that boundary is in place, and us being friends with them outside of things or engaging in these other ways that are, boundary
Yeah.
violations would be detrimental to them and
Yeah.
their healing journey.
And a realistic show or depiction of therapy on TV would be quite boring, right?
Yeah.
Like,
The only times I have seen it be somewhat realistic is if it's not a main part of the show.
Uh-huh.
Like
mm,
there's something going on in the show and then they have like a maybe 2 minute scene of the person seeing their therapist and you see how the therapist is responding or something like that and then the rest of the show goes on. It's the only time
yeah,
where I'm like, yeah, that's something a therapist would say
yeah,
or you know.
yeah.
I will
Or
say
the
there have
reality show, couples therapy on
reality shows.
Showtime.
Oh
Yeah.
yes.
hmm
There have been times where I've had clients where I'm like, man, I wish we could be friends.
Mm,
But then I recognize like, oh, but that's based off of our current relationship. That is not
yeah.
a friendship. And so
Mm-mm.
whatever I'm thinking what a friendship would look like is just in my imagination. So I don't
Yeah.
really know if we would be great friends. Do you know
hmm
what I mean?
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
right. But there are times where you have clients where you're like, well, we got a lot of similar interests and we've got,
Mm,
right? So it can be easy to think that. But what's interesting is you don't hear that being one of the major
mm,
boundary violations that happens. It's not therapist and client becoming friends, it's the romantic
yeah.
piece. Mhm.
That's interesting. I was just in a conversation with a couple of therapists about we had a mutual therapist acquaintance who said, "Well, I haven't seen this client in 2 years, and like we ran into each other, and we decided we're gonna be friends now." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, interesting." The
Mhm.
legal guideline is that's okay.
Mhm.
If it's been 2 years, I wouldn't do it.
Mm-mm.
No.
And actually, for psychologists, it's never okay.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Board of Psychology is completely against it, from my
Mm,
understanding, at
I
least.
always
good
I
for
don't
thought the
think it's
them.
two-year
changed.
rule was weird. I even had a
The 2 year rule is
therapist.
very weird.
Yeah, I
I
had a
think so
therapist
too.
that I
Yeah.
was working with personally when I was getting my hours, who asked, I ended therapy and then I ran into her like a year later and she's like, has it been 2 years yet? Can we be friends? And I was like,
Oh no.
Oh,
I was like, I don't think it's been 2 years. And she's a lovely person, but
yeah,
that
Yeah.
was not the relationship. So,
yeah.
I think.
Well, we're all in agreement about this. Like generally, like no, we don't want to trim. But I'll also share an experience. My very first therapist from when I was like a teenager. She recently passed, but we were in touch. And once every 2 or 3 years, I would go hang out at her house and we would talk about being therapists. And she would ask, how things are. And we developed a distant, very occasional professional, interpersonal relationship. And I learned some more about her life, but it felt very boundaried and appropriate because I had not seen her as a client in many years and it still had the power differential acknowledged
Mhm.
that she at one point had been my therapist, that she was the senior therapist, very wise. She actually came and guest lectured in one of my courses when I was graduate teaching. But that dynamic was always acknowledged and was always present, but we did have a different relationship. And I really, really valued that. And I think it takes a skilled therapist to do that,
Yep.
but it is possible. But no, not being besties. No.
Mm.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both for your time, and we'll leave it there, although I'm sure we could probably talk about boundaries for several more hours here.
Thank
And
you.
just a reminder to anybody watching or listening, I will have everybody's information in the description of this. Please reach out if you want to talk more about boundaries, or other things. Thank you both. Thanks, Shereen. Thanks, Laurel.
Thank you.